My name's Claire and I'm Head of Sales at Compass Education. Compass is an MIS, a management information system that is used across the globe. And I just want to introduce our report that we've been working on recently in terms of wellbeing and mental health of children in Wales. So most teachers and parents are aware that there are record numbers of young people that are struggling with their mental health. And there might be some debate about the cause. It could be the pandemic, it could be social media, world events, but there's really little argument that the numbers are just generally increasing. The NHS, various mental health charities, all of them are estimating that the proportion of 16-year-olds and under with mental health problems has risen from 1 in 9 only 6 years ago to around 1 in 5 now. So you can see that there's been a huge increase. And there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that the first place that parents and the students themselves are seeking help is from the school. So no reason to doubt that the mental health landscape in Wales is any different to any other parts of the UK, but there is limited data. And so to address that information gap, we did a report. We commissioned some independent researchers to do a survey of parents in Wales with at least one child in either primary or secondary school, and to ask them for their views on their children's mental health. And we wanted to know a number of different things, such as how worried children were about the issue, how worried parents were about the issue, and if they thought that there were significant differences between primary and secondary school age children, between boys and girls, etc. And the results were really quite revealing. And Rachel, if you can click onto the next slide, thanks. So the results, yeah, really quite revealing. I'm not going to read through them, obviously, because what I would love for you to do is to go onto the website and download the report. It is available in English and in Welsh. So it's there for you to download. But as I said, the results are revealing. Main findings, are on the screen at the moment. But if you fancy looking through the report and having a read of it, please download it and take the information from there. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Claire. And now we go over to Hayley. But before we do, please remember to submit your questions in the chat for her. Hayley.
Thank you. Let me just get my screen up. Can you all see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to present you this information. We're going to be looking at different ways that you can support your students, but also ways you can support yourself as well. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm a mum of 4, ranging between 23 and 15. I created Emotion Mind Dynamic, my own program that helps adults and children overcome their anxieties and depression. I've done 30 years of coaching children and families in various spaces and various institutions. I accidentally wrote a book about domestic violence. I was a foster carer and a backup foster carer for over 9 years. And leaving school with only 2 GCSEs, I managed to get my teaching and my master's later on in life. And that's just a little bit about me. So first, I want to really encourage you to think about expectations. And I remember the first job that I left because of something I'd seen in the place I was working. It was a school, and there were the expectation that 4-year-old children would bring little badges to school, and the badge was to depict what group they were in, their colour group. And this little girl of 4, she was absolutely berated in school because she hadn't brought her badge to school. And for me, that was a no-go. We have really high expectations of children. And I think sometimes we forget that maybe they have other things on their mind, and the things that we think are priorities, they don't think are priorities. And I really want you to keep that in mind when we're talking about mental health. So let's have a look at how we spot the signs. And some considerations for you as teachers would be to think about any noticeable changes in behaviour. So when I take you through the different signs that you could be looking for, I really want you to think about, has a child's behaviour changed so drastically that it's noticeable for you? We really want to remember fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So when we're talking about children changing, and mental health, quite often they are really sitting in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So when we talk to them about things, or we maybe sometimes we feel that they've done something wrong, so we maybe handle things in the wrong way, they're already in that response. They're gonna react back rather than respond. And let's look at the full picture. You know your learners, you know your children in your class, so make sure that you're looking at the whole picture. But here are some things to look for. Changes in behaviour, like a child who's generally quite quiet, they start acting out. There's attention-seeking behaviour. Maybe this is somebody who's already attention-seeking, but it feels a lot worse. Maybe they've become the class joker. And these are things we don't really think about when it comes to mental health. Restless and fiddling is a massive one for children with anxiety. They start to fiddle with anything. They start to move their legs. They start to need to walk. They start to want to answer back. Maybe you find they're not listening, or they're having volcano moments in school around things that they wouldn't generally have volcano moments. The emotional state, we're looking for children that may have been happy prior, and all of a sudden you notice that they're quite sad coming into school. Maybe they're angry or frustrated. You haven't really thought about it, but you're seeing things in them, their behaviours, the attention seeking is an angry attention seeking, or it's a frustration with not being able to do things. Going from either being negative or extremely positive. If children are trying to hide the fact that they're struggling with their mental health, they may become really positive because they don't want you to ask any questions. They may become lonely or isolated. They isolate themselves from their friends. Maybe they're not playing with them so often. Maybe they're off, maybe reading a book. And it's these kinds of behaviours, particularly the lonely and the isolation, where they're off reading a book, that we think that they're okay. But sometimes if it's a big change in behaviour, it's something we want to question with them and ask them, is there something going on? Are they feeling overwhelmed in class with things that generally don't seem like they should overwhelm a child? Or maybe the child isn't a child that gets overwhelmed all the time. When we're thinking about cognition, memory loss is a huge one. So as for that child I was talking about earlier, the badge wasn't the first thing on their mind. They needed to get dressed with their uniform. They needed to find their, bring their lunch bag. There was all these other things that they needed to think about. And the badge is just a secondary thing. But also words, they can lose sight of words because your brain becomes so overwhelmed when you have anxiety, or you're feeling really sad, or they're worrying about things. You just forget lots of different things. Books, bags, pens, rulers, all that kind of stuff. Thinking slower than normal. So if you put somebody on the spot and expect them to answer a question, they're not necessarily going to be able to answer that question for you straight away. They may need a little bit of time to think. They may struggle to answer the question that maybe last week, had you asked them, or a month ago, had you asked them, you know that they know the answer, but today they're feeling really overwhelmed and they just don't know how to answer that question. It's not that they don't have the answer. Maybe they just don't know how to present it, or they're really struggling in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Thinking or irrational thinking. So this could come out as asking loads of questions, just constantly asking questions. And I've been through that myself with my son, 20 questions, or the same question 20 times, even though they've had the answer the first time, they ask the same question. Irrelevant comments. So maybe you're in the middle of a conversation with another child and the child pipes up and needs your attention and asks for something that's completely nothing to do with the conversation. Looking at social skills, avoiding extracurricular activities. You may have somebody who's been involved in everything that goes on around school time, and all of a sudden they stop. Or they stop one thing, they stop two things, and all of a sudden they're not doing anything. They're searching for acceptance and validation, whether that's with staff, whether that's with children. They're constantly needing somebody to validate who they are and what they're doing. They may become a bit more clingy or needy, and they may withdraw from friends or opportunities in school. So if you have a concert coming up, and usually they're the first to put their hand up and say, yes, I want to do it, you're noticing that all of a sudden they're not doing it. They're falling out with friends. Maybe they've been the most sociable child in your class, and all of a sudden they're argumentative, they have no friends, they're sitting on their own for lunch because their friends just don't want to be with them. But these are things that we kind of think are just children being children, and sometimes they are, and we are looking, as I said earlier, at the sort of the bigger picture and the whole picture. Physically, they may appear more tired or exhausted. And I will say, with a child who is struggling with anxiety, the exhaustion is completely different to being tired. It's an emotional exhaustion, not a physical one. So you might think that they're busy constantly physically, but you can't understand why they seem so tired and so lacking in motivation. That's because they have no energy and they're just struggling to kind of keep up with everything emotionally rather than physically. So we said about lack of energy, they also may have energy spikes. So you see a child who all of a sudden in the middle of the day, everybody else is calm and they just have this energy spike where they need to do something or they're really needing your attention. All of a sudden they're just in your face. It's not because maybe they're being naughty necessarily. It's just that they have all this energy and they don't know what to do with it. They can have difficulties with eye contact because for a lot of us who struggle with depression or anxiety, we don't want people to see it. And there is a saying, the eyes are the soul. We don't want people to see what's going on with us, so we stop with the eye contact. They may become unkempt or dishevelled, so you may start to see that they're not showering, so they may start become smelly in class. May not be a new thing, it may have got worse, but if it is a new thing, it's something to think about in terms of mental health. Projecting perfection. Now, we'd all love perfect children who completely behave, they do everything they're supposed to do, they do everything they're told, and they work hard. But actually that can be a sign of a child trying to hold themselves together when their anxiety is really bad. So if they work hard at this and focus on this, then the anxiety stays at bay. It's often why parents will say that they're good in school and then you see behaviour changes at home. Communication is a big one as well. Developing a stutter or stammer is not unusual with children with mental health issues because they're so full with all these emotions, with anxiety, frustration, worry, that their body and their mind just doesn't work the same way and they develop that stutter or stammer. Asking lots of questions, as we said earlier, and feeling a little bit insecure. Do they know that what they should know? Are they ready with all information? Unable to communicate or answer questions, as we said a little bit earlier. Shutting down or refusing to join in, even when you know that they would thoroughly enjoy something and it's really what they want to do, they may not want to do it. Needing to be involved in everything. So we are the opposite end of the spectrum there, where a child wants to be involved in everything just to feel validated, just to feel like they're doing okay. Now, this is a big one for me. We do a lot of asking why questions, and what I'm going to urge you to do is to take out the why and try and change the questions that you're asking. So if you said to a child, why have you done that? Why are you feeling like that? It's really difficult to answer. Whereas if you replace it with, what made you think that that was okay today? Or what made you do that and that you didn't think that it was going to hurt somebody else? Different questions will allow them to think about the answers. So how you can help, things to think about, check in with your own expectations and your own emotional state, set the tone in class, let them know what your expectations are, be consistent with it, and become comfortable talking all things mental health and well-being. I think this one for me is probably the biggest key that you could do for your class, is to really make well-being and mental health a topic that is easy and comfortable to speak about. So let's look at creating a safe space where everybody can learn, grow and develop. Communicate your expectations from the start. Children with mental health issues, if they are struggling with anxiety, when you let them know what's expected of them, it just makes life a little bit easier. Include the children in setting the rules. So you may have maybe the start of the year, you get all the children involved and you get them writing the rules and get those rules on the wall as well. It allows children to remember to take responsibility for their own behaviours and that they've added to the rules as well. Make sure that you're setting clear and consistent boundaries with all the children. But that just gives them a safe space. When somebody is struggling with anxiety, they need that safe space to know that this is how far I can push things. Power of breath. This is an amazing one. Box breathing is one of the easiest breathing you could do. And if you can introduce this into the start of your day or your class, even if it's just 5 minutes of box breathing where you would count. Box breathing is just looking at a box, as it says. Count 4 breaths in. I'm drawing the box now. You could draw the box of the children. 4 breaths in, hold for 4, 4 breaths out, hold for 4. And you just go round that. And if you did that for 5 minutes, it would allow the children to set the tone themselves for the rest of the class. So I've got that there, and these are coming out to you anyway. Have an emotional check. And this is where becoming comfortable with mental health and well-being and talking about it is really, really important, because it allows us to get familiar with our emotions and talking about emotions. And one of my biggest rules for all children I work with, all emotions are allowed, but not all behaviours are accepted. So it is okay to be angry, it's okay to be frustrated, but it's how you handle that is the thing that will allow you to be responsible for your behaviour. And when children understand that, and they need this at home as well, if you can encourage this at home as well, because some parents will allow children to do anything while they're angry because they're angry, but actually we still need those boundaries when anger is particularly anger I'm talking about, there's other emotions. You need to have those boundaries and to know what behaviours are acceptable. I love this one because this one's so important, and I see this with children all the time that are struggling with anxiety. Make mistakes and failures an opportunity to learn. Bring this up in class constantly. They are the best life lessons. Remember and remind children that they are the best life lessons. They are the next step to success. Nobody gets to success without failing or making mistakes. And actually, you learn more from the mistakes than you do success. And if we can teach children these lessons, it actually takes the pressure off, because you make a lot of mistakes when you're feeling anxious because you're not thinking as you would usually. And I'm sure you do this anyway. Celebrate achievements, big and small, whether that's with praise. And praise is one of the simplest, and it's free and it's pretty quick. Recognition in a particular way, if you've got a school recognition program or a certificate or an award. Apply the same behaviour standards to yourself. Now, I know you wouldn't do this in class, but I've done this with my children. I've gone and sat on the step for 35 minutes because I did something, I broke the rules at home. I'm not saying you should do that. But actually, when we apply the same standards to ourselves, it allows the children to have that role model and to understand that we're all in it together and we're all sort of earning that trust and respect, that you are a role model, that you're showing them that this is how we behave. Be clear and consistent with your behaviours and expectations. And I think that's a big one. I see this a lot with children where they feel that a teacher is doing it one way, but telling us that we're doing it wrong. That's a huge one. And self-empowerment is key to well-being and success. So this is a big one for me. You're the most important person in your world. And if you can invest in yourself and your own self-care and in and out of school, practice self-awareness and take note of your emotional state, your own stresses, your own triggers and your own barriers, and regulate with self-compassion, develop a practice for emotional regulation for yourself. And then there's some guidance on some whole school approach as well. So I'm sure you've got that going, but that's there for you to have a look at later as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hayley. That was really interesting. Can you please remember to submit any questions into the chat, and Hayley will be very pleased to answer them. So I'm going to give you a few questions. Right at the beginning, you said about children's priorities are often very different from your own ones. How do we establish that? How do we get that, especially from very small children? How can you get that out of them to even know what their priorities are?
I think some of it is common sense, isn't it? That a 4-year-old child coming to school, for me, I feel like a badge isn't something they're going to prioritise. When they've got to have breakfast, they've got to turn the TV off, they've got to put their socks on, their shoes, their tie, there's all these things. And I think it's about maybe asking the question in class. So what do you do? How do you get ready for school? And when you start to know that, you start to get a better picture of what their life is like and where their priorities are. Because children will tell you, if you ask the right questions, children will tell you what their priorities are. I'm sure if you asked what your priorities are, they wouldn't get it. But
no, but if you ask them a specific question, how do you get ready for school?
And what do you need to get ready for school? So they would then sort of be telling you when you get that fuller picture, really.
Okay, that's interesting. How do you think teachers can balance maintaining clear boundaries whilst being empathetic to all their students' emotional needs? Because that's quite hard, isn't it?
It really is. And I've worked with domestic violence. I've worked in the foster care system. So I understand that teachers are under immense pressure to understand a little bit about everything. And I think it's if we the way I see it, from my perspective, if we focus on the well-being, I think everything else will stack up on top of that. So if you start to have those clear and consistent boundaries and create that space for well-being, you'd be surprised at how many of the other things like domestic violence, if they're living with parents with substance misuse, a lot of things will be stacked on top of the well-being. And for me, it's a foundation thing.
Right. Is that how you wrote your accidental book on domestic violence? Be from sort of working with children affected, yeah?
I worked with women at the time, so my book is aimed at women. So that was the kind of, I worked with women and children. But yeah, it was how I came about writing. It was only supposed to be a trifle leaflet, and I wrote 160 odd pages. So yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Another thing that struck me was you say, you know, success comes from failure. Which obviously it does, and the best successes have come from people who have failed and failed and failed and failed. So I guess it's perseverance. But in a school setting where so much is about sort of success or failure and getting things wrong, how do you reinforce that? It must be hard.
I think. Yeah, it is. And this is where I think teachers are really, they have a massive job. But I think with mistakes and failures, we need to talk more about how important they are. Because I've seen my children be told, answer this question, there's no wrong answer. And then they get told that the answer's wrong. And then they've kind of lost trust in the teacher. They've lost lost respect for the teacher because of, she said that there's no wrong answer, but clearly there was. So be okay in class with making mistakes and actually use it as a lesson to teach everybody. So if somebody makes a mistake, without naming any names, if that's an issue, use it as a lesson for everybody. So what could we have done differently if we'd have done X, Y, Z? But the embarrassment of being told there's no right, wrong answer and then answering wrong, my children have hated that.
Well, it's mainly the embarrassment, isn't it, for anybody who gets anything wrong and what other people are going to say about you. And then they might not ever ask anything again because it's just put them off. It's really hard. What are some signs that a student might be struggling with their mental health but trying to project perfection?
Putting in work where they have done. A lot of children will focus on making sure that there's no mistakes in the work, that they've gone over it and over it and over it. This may be their 10th version of a piece of work. So they may throw work because they did one thing wrong. And you see this in class as well as at home. And a child may say, oh, I did this 5 times because it wasn't right. It's this need to get things right and so quite often you feel out of control. So if they look like they're using work to feel in control, that's a big sign. And it looks like doing it 4 or 5 times, not being happy when they hand it in, not being happy with a grade below the top mark. Those are kind of signs to look for.
If they are sort of masking it really well, say they're really sort of going over their work time and time again. I mean, how do you check on that? Because if they're doing it at home, you won't know, will you?
No, and it's about having those conversations, isn't it? If particularly, so one of the things I said at the start was looking for changes, noticeable changes. And this is where if a child has maybe they're messy writing and their writing's become really tidy, they used to make mistakes and hand in anyway, and now there's no mistakes. That's a big indicator. But I think we don't check in enough with children that are projecting perfection either. I think quite often
they look as though they're doing well, so you don't bother to ask them. Oh, that's really interesting. So even the children that are doing well, you need to keep asking them as well. Right, I've got a question for you. How do you know that the issue is not a safeguarding issue, for example, neglect and so on, and it's more mental health, which could be triggered by a different issue?
And I think this is the thing, okay, because a lot of the indicators I've identified today could be anything really. So this is why we need to know the full picture. You would know, maybe you would see other signs of neglect. Maybe they're not bringing the right foods in. Maybe the clothing has changed. Mum's in a new relationship. There's so many things that we need to think about, because it's not just the one thing. We would never sort of make an assumption that a child is struggling because their behaviour has changed. It might be something's happened last night at work, at home. You know, mum shouted at them and they're feeling deflated, or they've come to school and they've taken it out in school. So it's looking for as many signs as possible and putting the jigsaw puzzle pieces together. I think this is key. If they see other teachers, speak to other teachers, so particularly in secondary school. You know, if you're seeing children in who have other teachers, talking to them about their behaviour in class, have they seen any changes, and developing the full picture rather than making it on the little bits of information that we have.
Okay, thank you. One of the big topics I know in schools at the moment is this whole thing about belonging. Many people are talking about this. So how can we create a stronger sense of belonging for all the students in the community?
I think it's involving them in making the rules. I do this with parents at home. I know this is really hard because we need specific rules in school. But when children are involved in making the rules, they become more accountable. They feel more part of the picture, part of the family, part of the community. And I think when you start to do that, and I also understand how challenging it can be in a school environment as well. But when we start to involve children in those kinds of decision-making things, they start to feel like they have ownership over the environment. And one of the things I say to children when I work with children is that even when they go to school, even if children who do dislike school, I should say, often don't want to be there. But my thing is, go and learn from the teachers. All teachers have this amazing experience, whether it's in their chosen subject or life in general. And I always urge children to go and learn from their teachers, even if it's not about the topic. And I think when we start to have conversations, one of my parents recently said that in school they have teachers who have open conversations with their parents. They laugh and they joke with them. That changes the dynamic. And I think if we can develop that kind of culture in school, we change the dynamic with the full family, not just the child as well.
Okay, that sounds good. When we've talked about the younger students, what are some age-appropriate ways to explain the importance of mental health to them? Because it's a lot more difficult, isn't it, to talk to them about their mental health?
Yeah, but I think we see mental health everywhere now. And how I tend to describe things is more in terms of, do you worry a lot? So using terms that they would recognise. Yes, I do worry a lot. Do you worry about one thing or do you worry about everything? And as you start to see their personalities as well when you have those conversations. But mental health, don't forget, is about behaviour, emotions, your mindset, attitude, perception. So if we can tackle all of these things with children, looking at how, exploring how they view things, how do they see things? I don't know if you've seen those perception pictures. They are wonderful to get to understand how children view things. And as we start again to have those conversations with children, we start to learn whether they understand about their own mental health and what they can do for self-care as well.
And what about those children that if you sort of approach or they are in a sort of challenging situation and they withdraw or shut down, what sort of strategies would you use to draw them out?
Once you've opened the door, if you are somebody that they trust, and this is the key for me, is if you've earned their trust and their respect and you open the door, they may not react the way you think they're going to react initially. Give them time and just always let them know that the door is open to talk to you. But if you kind of know what's going on for them, you can start to develop resources for them in particular. So if you see there's been anxiety, do the breathing. It's a wonderful life skill for everybody, but particularly with somebody with anxiety. But I think just because we've mentioned it, we the response that we want, and we're not always, because they're so frightened. We're in a society where we don't talk about mental health in a significant way. And if we can do that in class, that will change. But we want to be able to open the door and let them come to you when they're ready.
What do you mean we don't talk about it in a significant way? I mean, there is quite a lot of talk about mental health, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a lot of talk. I just feel like I want to see it be more embedded rather than talk that we have. Does that make sense? And I want to see it be part of the culture, and I don't think it always is. And sometimes it's seen as a tick box exercise. And with older children in particular, they'll say to me, they don't really do much with well-being. They just do it because they have to. I see it in the workplace as well. It's the same thing. If they feel it's a tick box exercise and it's not something that they believe in. And I'll give you an example of a child in school whose teacher, the 2 weeks before, had been blaming the children for causing her stress in her pregnancy. And then 2 weeks later, she's telling the children that she's the wellbeing officer and that they can talk to her about everything and anything. That was never going to get the children talking about anything at any point in time. So it's up to us as teachers, as adults, to embed it in the culture rather than just kind of, I have to do this because it's part of my job kind of thing. It makes a difference. It shows in the behaviour as well.
Yeah. So I suppose, that goes to the whole school approach and making sure that all the teachers are signed up to it and aren't just nodding their heads, because otherwise it's not going to work. So how would you suggest that, for senior leaders to make sure that the whole school is bought into this?
I think mental health in particular needs some really good training, some really effective training from a realistic point of view. So one of the things I'm quite aware of, there's a lot of training out there that does it from a training book. And I think we don't understand enough about what the real world is, what it's like living with mental health. And I think when these, Time to Change Wales is out there. I know that I'm in Wales and we have Time to Change Wales. There was a Time to Change England, but there isn't anymore. And we have champions that go in and share their story, because it gives you a true value on what it looks like living with mental health conditions, different mental health conditions. Because I don't think many people understand what that looks like, what it feels like to do that. And when you've got training from that perspective, it's completely different to training from a book or a manual. And as you start to allow, encourage teachers to understand what that looks like for children and themselves, one of my big things is looking after yourself. We start to become more comfortable with asking the questions, particularly if we're exposed to people who have lived with mental health conditions. We have a really awful media representation of mental health conditions. And it frightens people. People are afraid to talk about it. So we need people who are willing to talk about it, who are willing to sit in a room and listen and ask those questions that they have, those questions that you would love to ask, but you think, are they politically correct? Is it the right question? And when you start to do that, it does become easier to talk about it in schools as well. And then you've got that whole school approach. You develop a wellbeing charter, a wellbeing policy, and you have all the expectations and then all the guidance and all the kind of help and things like that. And a big thing, I think, develop a resource in school of places that you can go for help. So in your locality, there may well be charities or organisations. There's obviously national ones as well. But if you develop a resource in school that anybody can look at, maybe it's put online and it's, people can just go and look at it if they need to, that gets people more comfortable again with looking for help for themselves or looking for help for other people as well. And knowing that I've got that there, if I need to go for help or I need to sort of refer somebody or I need to give somebody a resource, I've got that there.
Yeah, everybody needs the support, the backup, don't they, for
Yes.
doing these things and to know where it all is. Before I finish up asking you, I just wanted to touch on the self-empowerment that you were talking about. So I was watching a Brené Brown video this morning, where she has "You are enough" written across her chest. And that's quite a difficult concept to sort of get over to, especially younger children, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to say it's not actually,
No?
because
Oh, good.
one of my youngest clients was 5. And when he came to see me, they'd been through a violent relationship, mum and dad. And he was displaying some really aggressive behaviours and he hated it. And we did the first session and I thought, I took him through the emotional vessel. So understanding the emotional vessel, I took him through my coaching model, which helps him understand his internal patterns. And after he left, I thought, no, I don't know if he got it. But he left my appointment. He went home and described the whole thing to his dad and his mum, his stepdad, his granddad and his grandmother and his mum. And he went step by step, everything. He completely got it because it was somebody helping him understand himself. He knew what was going on, so he knew his behaviours, but nobody had explained to him why those behaviours were happening. That was so empowering that just from that session, there was another 2 sessions to go. From that session, he stopped being aggressive.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's actually not quite as difficult as we think it is.
All right. Oh, okay. That's good. That's very good to know. So before we sort of finish up here with asking you questions, is there one thing that you'd really like for teachers to take away today? What really important thing would you like them to remember from what you've said?
I think the self-empowerment piece is really important. That self-empowerment for yourself. So you are the most important person in your world as a teacher, as a parent, as a family member, but also that self-empowerment for children. When we give them the tools, it changes lives. We just have to give them the right tools. And the same with us as adults, we need the right tools as well. Otherwise, we can't be doing what we need to be doing. So the self-empowerment piece is the biggest thing to take away from today.
Okay, thank you very much, Hayley. And if you've got any questions for Hayley that you've forgotten to ask, I'm sure she won't mind if you get in touch with her. She seems to have all her social media behind her. So yeah, you can ask her questions. So any final thoughts from you, Claire?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting how you finished on the fact that we need these tools, and obviously being a software provider and a management information system within schools is one of the things that we talk about quite a lot, having the tools to be able to tackle problems that schools are facing. So, you know, no teacher, however responsible they may be, can be expected to deal with a problem if the tools to identify and monitor that problem aren't to hand. So, and that's particularly true, I think, when we start talking about well-being and behaviour in schools. And for me, I've got 2 children in schools in Wales, primary school age, and I'm naturally interested in how schools address student well-being because, you know, it's very apparent that there are these problems within schools. And as the results of our survey that we were talking about earlier show, parents in Wales are really, really concerned that too many of the children are struggling with mental health issues these days. And what's more, I think they suspect that many of them are going to real lengths to really sort of hide the problems from their parents. And it was a bit like you were saying, Anne, about masking these problems from parents and teachers. And I really share those concerns because I'm really worried that my children are going to have these sort of issues that they face and not be happy to come home and talk to me about them. So, you know, a lot of the community, I think, are turning to schools looking for support. And I think this is where having a really good school management information system that works with the children in the schools, with the teachers in the schools, and gives you the right tools to be able to monitor this kind of stuff is really important. And as I mentioned at the start, Compass Management Information System, we are used in over 3,500 schools in Australia, in Ireland, and in the UK. And it's really, really adaptable. And one of the key features that we have within the system is a module called Chronicle. And Chronicle is our wellbeing and behaviour module, and it can be configured to support additional learning needs, record and refer safeguarding issues, reward positive behaviour, analyse trends over time, and produce automatic reports for parents and for colleagues within the school. And I think it's an essential tool in behaviour management as well. And it's great that we have these tools that we can help schools with and to, to present to them. Being adaptable, being template driven, it means that no school has to use the same templates. They can make it work for their own school in the way that they reward the behaviour, in the way that they record the behaviour and the wellbeing issues. So it's a really, really fantastic tool. And I think it's, if it's something that anybody wants to look at, I'm very, very happy to work with them through that and show them a demonstration of Chronicle and of the system in its entirety. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Hayley as well, because that was really, really interesting. And I think it'll be really helpful to a lot of teachers and a lot of staff in schools. Just a reminder for those of you who haven't potentially been on any of the webinars that we've done as Compass, you can catch up and listen again to hear from Dr. Tara Porter, Luke Rees and Rhys Thomas, all of whom we've done webinars with over the last few weeks. They are on the website. So if you have a look at the screen, the website address is there with a link to the webinars that we've done previously. And once this recording is finished, we'll obviously put Hayley's on there as well, because I think it was fantastic. Thank you so much.